behind me has been covered in foil by the locals here who are doing what they can, like they need to do what they can, rather than they don't want to leave their city, they don't want to leave their home. So they're supporting the military and supporting the police however they can. And we are seeing the military and the police in different corners of this old city, once relatively calm, but now tense and on edge.
So Yalda, tell us more then about the practical preparations that they're making there.
Well, as you know, martial law has now come into effect in this country. So women and children who want to get out of the fighting have managed to leave. They're using the various different borders to get out. The majority of them using the Polish border, which is just 65 kilometers away from here. But the men who stay and those who want to stay and support the government, support the military, are making Molotov cocktails, for example, are picking up arms and going to the front lines. I spoke to a mother yesterday who told me in the early hours of the morning, her 16-year-old son disappeared. And when she spoke to him, he said that he'd gone to the front lines to volunteer, even though martial law is for 18 to 60-year-olds. Even the young teenage boys want to somehow get involved. They know that their country is at risk of slipping away, and that's not the feeling that they want to have. They don't want to lose their nation. They want to fight for a free Ukraine. And so there is this sense of solidarity. So people are doing what they can. President Zelensky has called for foreign fighters to come here as well. So when we were on the border yesterday, we saw this sort of makeshift tent that was created. We spoke to the military there and asked them how many had come. There were 2 fighters so far from the international community. Trained soldiers had arrived to fight. President Zelensky says there's 16,000 of them in the country now. They welcome more. So people are trying to do what they can to almost avoid what is inevitable, because really the might of the Russian force, they still do have superiority here in this country, and that is what this nation and the people are dealing with.
And you mentioned obviously how close Lviv is to the Polish border, and also how many people have come to Lviv from elsewhere in Ukraine. Are people mostly staying put there for now, or are people starting to leave Lviv as well?
We're seeing tens of thousands of people get to the border to leave, and as we've heard, a couple million have made their way into Poland. It's a 150-kilometer border there. But there are also local NGOs who are telling people to remain in the city, remain in the country. They are encouraging them to stay, because frankly they think it's better that they stay in Ukraine and try and assist where they can and rebuild in a relatively safe part of the country rather than become refugees. And although we're seeing people in different European countries welcome these displaced people, we saw that in Berlin, for example, where scores of people had arrived, Germans, to try and help Ukrainian refugees who left their homes. But those who have stayed are staying in hotels, for example. Most of the hotels here in Lviv have been taken by the internally displaced. We spoke to a young family yesterday who had come from Kiev, and I asked them how long they're staying. They said they hope for a couple of weeks, and then they'd like to go back to their home. They said their parents are there. They had a 2.5-year-old child, and they were worried about the safety and security of that child. And it does feel like many people are leaving not out of choice, but for the sake of their children. And you see devastating scenes of fathers saying goodbye to their children, uncertain of when they will be reunited, and frankly, if they will be reunited.
Thank you. Yalda Hakim reporting from Lviv. Well, we can go now to Professor Claire Corkhill, who is an expert in nuclear material from the University of Sheffield, following on, of course, from that attack at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. Well, we've heard from the International Atomic Energy Agency saying that the plant is now secure, but it's under the control of the Russian forces. In terms of what happened there and the actual risk, was there any risk at any point, or how great was the risk potentially at any point?
Well, the fact that projectiles and missiles are being fired in the direction of a nuclear power station, one that's operating, highlights that there are enormous risks surrounding conflict in a country that has so many nuclear power stations. Now, it's unlikely in this case that it's unlikely that an destroyed, we might have a situation where the nuclear fuel inside of the reactors overheats and melts down. And this would be a disastrous scenario like the one that happened at Fukushima nuclear power station.
So we heard
At Bay, skincare expert Caroline Hirons has her guide.
The nuclear reactors. Does that mean it is very completely safe?
I couldn't do it! It was so good!
Circulate water around the fuel. They can look after themselves. It's in a cool enough state for there not to be a meltdown hazard. Now that doesn't say that the risk quite concerned about at the nuclear power site is the fact that has been taken out of the reactor. The material is not really well shielded when compared to the reactor itself. So a fire radioactivity to the environment.
And this is obviously not the only nuclear power plant around. We were hearing from the UAE that they are going to try to get some sort of an agreement.
This is something that the International Energy Agency has said in their recent news briefings. It's just not it could be potentially this hazardous in that way. So the only action that
10 most unusual kids around the world.
if protecting those areas militarily isn't possible, then it would be to put them all into this cold shutdown state. Which would mean that there wouldn't be this meltdown kind of incident. But obviously the side effect of that is that 25% of the electricity that's supplied to Ukraine comes from nuclear power. So that would be a huge amount of electricity lost to the grid, which would ultimately affect the capability of the Ukrainians to fight war.
Mm-hmm. And it's unclear at this point whether that's a measure that they I mean, obviously they will be considering it. Potentially they would be forced into it.
Ready when you are. Ready when you are.
Ukraine at the moment, example, Kharkiv, there's not electricity being powered people's homes. We work with scientists who are in their homes with no electricity right now. So there's obviously a clear impact on the local population and civilians. But militarily, the army would like to keep communications open, for example, electricity is really a necessary supply
Presumably that's a consideration in terms of what has been done.
Potentially, it could be that the reactors were not directly targeted themselves, and it was the intention all along to target them from the periphery of the nuclear power stations to force this shutdown of one of the reactors. It's very difficult to know whether that was directly or not, but it's ultimately the conclusion looks like it's going to.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Dr. Claire Corkill. Well, we've been telling you about the NATO Foreign Ministers meeting taking place in Brussels, who's the British Foreign Secretary, speaking just before she went in. This was
exactement, Monsieur Grey.
fire has been
Really?
extinguished, but it is called for an urgent meeting of the UN.
I got something.
This is a threat to
Pay attention.
what today is about is showing the strength of our unity.
So you're telling me that
all I have to do is put my hands up like this and bounce, and that's how I.
Weapons where the UK led the first European country to donate defensive weapons. We're also going to be talking about sanctions. We've been very coordinated in sanctions.
Sure, anything for this new setup.
It's having a big effect in Russia, but we now need to do more. We particularly need to look at the oil and gas sector. How do we reduce our dependence across Europe on Russian gas? How do we cut off the funding to Vladimir Putin's war machine? That's what I'm going to be advocating at both the G7 and the discussions with the EU.
You raise sanctions. Why is the UK slower in sanctioning Russian oligarchs than the US?
Well, I mean, quite frankly, how shocking that someone would come in here and plonk,
Right.
and sit on a sofa.
I mean, that is just outrageous.
Well, that's never happened.
Sanction more companies. The number one thing's important though is that we are unified with our partners across the world in putting the toughest ever sanctions we've had on Russia.
You have no choice.
Trust. More than 1 million people have left Ukraine.
Best bit for a Monday, handy ways to keep yourself warm.
Yes, yes, and Alice had.
Helping at reception centres, offering free access to healthcare and onward travel. Well, let's go to Nick Thorpe, who is in Budapest, number of refugees. Also going to Hungary, and tell us, Nick, what the situation is there.
Yes, well, I'm here at the Budapest West station. Hungary is so far pretty much in second place to Poland. A couple of days ago, when I last saw those numbers, it was over 120,000 then. But just behind me, as you can see this is platform 10 behind me at the back of the picture. That's where the refugee trains are arriving every hour or so far this morning. Those in green jackets, these are volunteers from the Hungarian Protestant churches who've laid on an amazing kind of spread of food, sandwiches, fruit, and chocolate bars and so on for all the people arriving here this morning. This is all donations from the Hungarian public being channeled to those new arrivals here at Budapest West Station. Astonishing scenes here really reminds me of the previous refugee crisis some 7 years ago, when refugees arriving in Budapest stations from even further afield.
And Nick, in terms of the numbers there, what is the capacity? Because obviously people are being incredibly hospitable, not just there in Hungary, but elsewhere in other countries across Europe, where they are taking people into their homes, but with a suggestion that up to 4 million people could leave, that capacity will not be infinite.
And as you say, Moldovans, Slovaks, all the 5 countries up and down this border, and of course other countries in Europe, because a lot of the people arriving here now will be looking to travel on. A third, perhaps, or a half of the people travelling on to other countries, whether by train they can travel for free, or by bus or car. Some people coming from far away to pick them up. So a huge outpouring of generosity, I think, across Europe at the moment, including from Hungarians here. Just interestingly, talking to some of the refugees arriving here this morning, for the first time we've met people from Odessa in the south, near Kherson, which is the city that fell before a couple of days ago, and also not so far away from Zaporizhia, the power station was struck, the accommodation areas, the reference buildings of that nuclear power station earlier. So we are getting new cities named by people as we ask them where they've come from this morning.
Thank you. Well, we mentioned also Poland. Kasia Madera is on the just over the border in Poland.
This is Kostrova. This is just moments from the very border itself. And what we're seeing here, time and time again, buses coming from the border with people who have just crossed over. And these are predominantly women and children and the elderly who have finally got to Poland after their own individual stories of trying to get across Ukraine to the Polish border itself. This is the first time that they're going to get something hot to eat, something hot to drink, warm up, reassess what it is that they're going to do next, because these people have literally just crossed the border and they are now in Poland, tired, bewildered, and just exhausted with their trip so far. Poland has created a huge infrastructure to help these people because, of course, Poland has taken in the highest number of people coming over Ukraine. If you think about it, 1 million people displaced, leaving Ukraine in the space of just over a week. This is a staggering number of people. Ukraine nationals and non-nationals as well, because of the diverse community within Ukraine, the workers there, and also the student community there. Poland saying everybody is welcome, everybody can come here and seek safety. And the welcomes that they get, it's just been very, very heartwarming to see how the police force, how the fire brigade, how all the different firemen, how the whole host of volunteers are helping people. What we're hearing is people opening up their doors, opening up their homes, offering places for people to stay the night, people to rest, people to sleep. What is really staggering is that there are no large camps. There are places where people can just rest for a night or so, but there are no large camps. Homes are being opened up so that these people that have had a traumatic journey to get to safety can just have some rest. A very large number of Ukrainian nationals live in Poland, and they're here. Many, many family members are here to meet them, but there are also people who don't have anyone to join, don't have anywhere to go. And again, you see lots and lots of different people who come and who offer up their homes, a bedroom, a sofa. We're just hearing these stories time and time again. Every now and again, you hear a Tamil message saying that there's a driver who's come from Berlin. They want to take families to Berlin. We're hearing people come from the Netherlands, from the Czech Republic, from all over Europe, wanting to bring people onwards, because there is an understanding that within 8 days, within such a short space of time, 1 million people have left Ukraine and they've come to countries, neighbouring countries. Nearly 700,000 have just come to Poland alone. A staggering number of people. And given the volatility of the situation in Ukraine, given the uncertainty of the situation on the ground there, those numbers will rise. The European Union is talking about implementing a temporary protection directive so that people who are fleeing Ukraine, who are coming over from the border into the EU, that they can stay here, they can work here, they can access medical care here, they can access schools here, because there are children coming over that have been displaced, their world's turned upside down. So the EU opening up its borders, and then the next step of their journey begins in places like this. This is one snapshot. This is Kostrova in East Poland, right on the border, and this is one of many places like this where these families are coming, where these individuals are coming, and they're working out what happens next, given the long journey that all of you already had. The EU opening the source, Poland opening the source, and you will be safe here. You are welcome in this country.
That's Kasia Madera reporting on the refugee situation just over the border in Poland. We can talk now to Alexander Daniliuk. He is former Minister of Finance in Ukraine, served as the Secretary. Hello?
I am former Special Advisor to the Minister of Defense and Special Advisor to the Head of Intelligence Service. We have two different Alexander Danilyuks.
Okay, understood. Thank you very much.
I'm the head of joining Ukraine NATO group for country I've reported.
Okay, and so you are basically paying particular attention to what's happening around Kyiv. Can you tell us what the situation is now? There is that convoy heading towards Kyiv. What's happening with that?
Actually, our troops and airborne brigades, they started the convoy, and actually, the original plan of Russians was to move it to surround Kiev from south, but right now we still have logistics on Kiev-Odessa highway.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. That's Alexander Danilyuk. The UK government has imposed sanctions on 2 more Russian oligarchs, one of whom, until this week, was a major investor in Everton Football Club. The men's assets will be frozen and they won't be allowed to travel to the UK. And luxury yachts owned by Russian oligarchs have been seized by the French and German authorities. But the head of Ukraine's largest energy company has told the BBC that the West must stop buying oil and gas from Russia if it wants to stop the war spreading. Here's our economics editor, Faisal Islam.
Seized the floating palaces of top Russian billionaires accused by the European Union of being too close to Vladimir Putin. The Dilbar mega yacht, the largest in the world with 2 helipads, owned by the British football-linked Elisha Usmanov, are now seized by German officials. And on the south coast of France, French customs seizing Amol Vera, owned by long-term Putin ally Igor Sechin, boss of the Rosneft oil company. Here in the UK, the Foreign Office has also added Usmanov to Britain's sanctions list, alongside Putin associate Igor Shcherbak, both men hit by a travel ban and an asset freeze on their mansions and flats worth many millions of pounds.
We're fast forwarding sanctions against Russian oligarchs. But we need to go further. We need to make sure no Russian bank has access to SWIFT.
The Premier League welcomed the sale of Chelsea Football Club by its Russian owner Roman Abramovich, saying the ownership had become unsustainable. The opposition repeatedly raised in the comments why Mr. Abramovich, who denies financial links to the Kremlin, was not being targeted with sanctions. Russian-owned yachts are being seized in Europe. Russian oligarchs are having to rely on cash because their debit and credit cards have been stopped from working. The process here in the UK, a little slower because of the need for legal due process, we're told. But what is the point of any of this if we continue to send billions in dollars, euros and pounds directly to the Kremlin by buying its oil and its gas? One of the routes for that money is through Ukraine via an existing pipeline exporting Russia's gas to Europe.
That's how he finances his military machine.
The man who runs that is under bombardment in Kyiv and told us that Western sanctions must now target the energy billions.
Putin will get his money to spend this money to kill us. The whole idea of the sanctions is to shock the Putin regime and to make sure that ordinary Russians, they feel the effect.
It sounds like a form of kind of economic war.
Yes, that's on an economic front. You have to believe as if you were at war with Russia.
Rosneft is the leader of the Russian army.
European nations are ramping up plans to reduce dependence on Russian energy. Those plans may be needed much sooner than expected. Faisal Islam, BBC News.
Our Deputy Political Editor Vicky Young has been telling us about the issues the UK government is encountering in imposing sanctions on Russian oligarchs.
There's lots of talk still about sanctions and government coming under pressure over all of that. And really, they've been defending themselves effectively, saying that in this country we don't have a system where governments can just go around seizing assets without some kind of proof of wrongdoing. And that, they say, is why it is taking, in some cases, a little bit longer to get the names of Russian oligarchs onto that sanction list. They have added 2 more, as you were reporting, overnight. So their point is that you need a burden of proof. You have to make the case. It has to be legally sound, because otherwise you end up in a situation where there are legal challenges. Now, the problem the government's got is they've talked very tough on all of this. They've talked about this trust in particular, saying that they want to get rid of what they call dirty Russian money from London, and they want to take this action. But you can sense the frustration amongst ministers. They think that actually it's the legal system that is preventing them in some cases. So there is talk of maybe some kind of move to try and make sure that legal firms working on behalf of oligarchs can't slow the system down and fight this all the time. I think the problem they've got too is that when it comes to the EU and oligarchs, we've seen in the last couple of days Germany, France seizing yachts worth millions of pounds, and so the contrast is made. The other argument from the government is that what they're focused on is really trying to look at the impact that this is having. So really between the lines, their suggestion is that yes, the headlines are good if you're seizing the yacht of some well-known oligarch, but actually it's action against Russian banks, for example, that's really turning the screw on President Putin, and it's really affecting the Russian economy.
Vicky Young, the UK Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has been speaking about the attack on the nuclear power plant this morning. He was speaking in Denmark.
We have been monitoring the situation through the night. Our understanding is the fire and the shelling was on a training facility just on the outskirts of the actual nuclear power plant. The Russians eventually relented and let the firefighters in. They put that out, and the International Atomic Energy Agency and indeed the Ukrainian atomic regulator has said that the levels, the radioactive levels around the site have not gone above normal levels, but we are keeping it monitored. And I think that we call upon the Russian president to absolutely cease attacking sites such as that. It's incredibly dangerous. It's not just dangerous for Ukraine and the Russians, it's dangerous for Europe, and it is playing with fire that really is beyond anything to do with logic or necessity, and we, in the strongest possible terms, ask him to stop that. If it is either being done deliberately, then it must be stopped. If it was done by accident, then I ask his leaders to make sure, his military leaders, they are very, very careful with the infrastructure they are attacking. The difficulty I have when you ask what I think about the president's mindset is, as I warned earlier in the week, the Russian armed forces has in its arsenal a whole range of horrors that go way beyond capabilities that we would choose to have if you're complying with Geneva Conventions, the thermobaric vacuum bombs, for example, that we see in their inventory, the way they are used, the cluster munitions that many of our countries have banned, those are weapons they still use. And the worrying signs from President Putin is, in his words, he seems to indicate no limit. And I think we have to be very, very strong as an international community to remind the President that we are, as NATO, 30 nations with huge amounts of capability, both conventional and we are a nuclear alliance, and it's very, very important he understands that, he does. And then also our friends who are not in NATO, we will also make sure we stand shoulder to shoulder with them.
UK Defence Secretary. The United Nations says 1 million refugees have now left Ukraine since the Russian invasion began. More than half have gone to Poland. Many will have travelled there from the western Ukrainian city of Lviv, just over 65 kilometres from the border. Lviv isn't occupied for now, but there are people living in the city who understand what it means to be invaded. Fergal Keane reports from Lviv.
It is relentless. In a station where they load aid for the embattled armies in the east, and coming the other way, families propelled into exile by President Putin's war. Today, the number who fled exceeded 1 million, with many more on the move. These are Roma gypsies who've escaped the Russian advance on Kharkiv, 1,000 kilometers to the east. What is it like in Kharkiv? The war. It's difficult, said Lovell. Everything is burning, everything is destroyed. No one is listening to us. No one wants to help us. His daughter Sonia says, it's terrible. The Roma have an inherited memory of war's trauma. Tens of thousands were murdered by the Nazis in World War II. And this city of Lviv, crossroads of east and west, saw one of the worst pogroms directed at Jews by the Germans and Ukrainian collaborators. Both Russia and Ukraine suffered terribly during the Second World War. But if there's someone who the experience of that terrible time, and this is a period of increased anxiety, history casting a long, deep shadow. I met someone in Lviv bearing the trauma of present and past. Tatiana Zabrunaya is 84 years old, a survivor of the Holocaust.
Я ее спрашивала все время про войну, что и как и почему. Она мне никогда ничего не рассказывала, начинала дрожать, плакать и просила не напоминать ей о войне. Видно, муж сестры моей мамы, сестра пострадала, да. Они были в Киеве. Мне мама говорила, что их расстреляли или как, не знаю, в общем.
Now Tatiana has family who are trapped in Kiev.
У меня есть дочка и приемный сын. У меня есть внучка, которая сейчас, к сожалению, находится там, где идут бои, в Киеве. Кто бы мог подумать, что повторится 22 июня 41 года со стороны России.
This great city is now a temporary haven. It's also where lawyers first discussed the very concept of genocide and crimes against humanity. Like historian Sofia Diak, who now helps refugees and worries for Ukraine and the world.
Those lives which was killed, and there are so many of that happening right now. And the question for us is, what kind of world we want to live in the future? The world where, because of geopolitical situation and world order, we can pay the price for human lives. I think this is about here. This is about Syria. This is about so many places in the world.
At the station, a volunteer plays Ukraine's national anthem. Lviv's history is a story of survival, but also of war's immense continuing cost. Fergal Keane, BBC News, Lviv.
Here in the UK, the response to the humanitarian crisis developing as people flee the fighting in Ukraine has meant thousands of people have donated clothing, equipment, food and supplies to those displaced by the invasion. John McGuire has been to a pub in Norfolk in eastern England where they've been overwhelmed by the donations from members of the public.
All of this has just arrived overnight, but they have been collecting items throughout the week. For example, these food boxes filled with dried foods. It's a ration pack essentially for a family living here. Peas, tomatoes, rice, soups, tea bags, sugar. Imagine how useful, how welcome that will be. These bags are all full of warm clothing. There are nappies here. Also, we've had ex-servicemen be donating kit. That's essential as well. Medicines will also be taken, setting off from today. We can talk to Paul, the landlord here at the pub. Paul, the effort has been extraordinary. What's the response been like as far as you're concerned?
The community of Dereham and further afield, Norfolk as a whole, really has really come together, and it always does, to be fair. Dereham is a special place.
Many people have been touched, haven't they? And lots of people have thought, what can I do to make it?
Yeah, they have. Everyone wants to do their little bit. We've had all ages come in with donations, children with toys. Yeah, it's incredible.
But you're taking medical supplies yourself to the Ukrainian embassy, is that right?
Yeah, we're taking a load as soon as we head off to London.
And you've been told what people need to make a difference.
Yeah, that's right. We've sort of narrowed it down. They've been very selective resources actually. Need to get stuff out to help people.
Well, thank you very much. Safe travel down to Ukraine. The truck's just been loaded and we've passed the sexual work.
ship full of goods down to the Ukrainian embassy in central London. And I thought, yeah, this is something that's upstream we've got availability to do. So one truck was turned into 2 trucks, and still we had. So yeah, that's right. And full of sections. And the goods are still coming, you know, so it's absolutely amazing how everybody has pulled together.
We're very blessed today. You were saying earlier, a family is helping families, dispossessed families that are in opposition to violence,
As we've been hearing, hundreds of thousands of people fleeing the country, but there are also some heading the other way. Ukrainians returning to their countries to join relatives or take up arms against the Russian forces. Our Europe correspondent Mark Lowen reports.
The farewell of fear. Between safety of Poland and a desire, a need to return. Driven by patriotism, bravery, and knowledge they're outgunned by the enemy. They left for Krakow packing to survive a siege. A 3-hour trip to the border towards the darkness of war, praying for protection. En route, there's no respite from the news back home. Lila hasn't even told her mum and dad she's returning. Would they be worried about you going back to Ukraine?
Parents worried
Many going back to fight, like husband and wife Alexander and Maria, have no military experience, just love for their country.
Everyone takes to return. If we live for normal when there's war there, people tell us they'd like to be in our place. I would even swap with them. But of course, we would go back.
I could not speak Turkish. Then we decided to go home, and that made us feel better. I will cry when I see my family, because when the fighting began, I was scared I would never see them alive again.
At the border, we left them, their journey continuing into the fog of war.
It is so strange to think that just over a week ago, they would have crossed this border freely and without another doubt. But now it has become a frontier exchange.
It took Alexander and Maria another 24 hours to reach their city, Tripoli, which was heavily bombed. We tried to talk several times, but finally her message, "I'm so sorry we can't speak. We're under extreme stress from what is happening to our country." Mark Lowen continues on the Poland-Ukraine border.